Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. The Chinese New Year holiday may have wrapped up, but that doesn't mean celebrations are over. Up next, the Lantern Festival, another time for family reunions in China. Also known as Yuan Xiao Festival in Chinese, it's a special day when families hang lanterns outside their homes and share glutinous rice balls as a family. The festival falls on the 15th day of the first month in the Chinese lunar calendar when a full moon appears. This year, the atmosphere may be a bit different due to the pandemic. Before we get started, I wish you and your family, everyone you love, good health and happiness in the new year. The past year was memorable, not just with country's fight against the pandemic, but also for reaching a milestone in taking a bite against the poverty. More than 10 million impoverished people were lifted out of poverty on average each year since the 18th National Congress of the CPC in 2012 in China. On Thursday, Chinese President Xi Jinping marked that country's anti-poverty accomplishments occasion in Beijing by handing out national honorary titles to recipients for their contributions to the cause. With such achievement, China has created another quote-unquote miracle that will go down in history, as Xi said.
创造了减贫治理的
We have created a China model for poverty eradication, and we've made great contributions to global poverty eradication. Based on the current poverty standard, 770 million rural people have been lifted out of poverty in China since reform and opening up began. And according to the international poverty line set by the World Bank, China accounted for 70% of the world's total, which were lifted out of poverty. China achieved the poverty eradication goal set by the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development 10 years ahead of the deadline.
Shaking out poverty is not the finish line, but the starting point, some say, of a new life and new endeavor. So what's next for China's poverty eradication efforts? Let's loop in our panelists. For poverty alleviation, join me in Beijing, Lu Zhixia, professor of College for Humanity and Development Studies with China Agricultural University. Also in Beijing, Matteo Marchisio, country director and representative for China with International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD. And Claire Pearson, International Development Director of DLA PEPR. Meanwhile, in Bangkok, Scott Hipser, who is the lecturer at the Webster University of Thailand. Also a book, Wealth Creation Approach to Reducing Global Poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to see you. I know this is a very strong panel. I want to start by listening to your stories. How do you see the poverty alleviation in China? Give me your personal stories about it.
I took over the responsibility for the China program in 2014, so almost 7 years ago. And since then, I travel in all areas of the country, in poor and remote villages in Qinghai, Yunnan, Hunan, Sichuan, Ningxia. And what I could see over the past 7 years, it has been an outstanding improvement in the living conditions of the rural people and the rural villages in all these places.
Tell me one example.
One rural road in Shanxi province that we built with resources from our organization, which basically allowed the villagers to reach to half the time from their village to the main city, allowing children to attain school with regularity and farmers to reach markets and sell the products, the local market.
So infrastructure, you are saying, Mr. Marchisio, is the
infrastructure.
Key. Yeah, okay. To you, Ms. Pearson, what is the key? Poverty alleviation.
When I arrived in Beijing, it was 2004, 2006. I remember FOCAC, 51 African presidents visiting Beijing. 2006 to 2018. I remember being WeChatted from a friend in Juba. He said, oh, I'm just running my water bottling plant in Juba, and I'm just making a WeChat transfer to Shenyang, to the water company that I'm cooperating with in China. I think the one phrase I've noticed in China, everybody goes up together. It's about multi-stakeholder management. It's about partnership. It's about Xuanying, win-win. The road to Shaokang, you're on it together. It's not a lonely road.
I see.
If you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go sustainably, go together. And that's what I've learned in
So
China.
you're arguing communication is actually bringing everybody together to be partners in a way. That is the key. To you, Mr. Hipscher.
Get the cash.
Yeah, the guy. Mr. Hipscher, to you, what is the key? What is your story?
You can approach poverty reduction as a problem as well, but the opposite of poverty reduction is creating a wealth. And so if we want to reduce poverty, that means we want to create wealth in areas that wealth does not currently exist. So a lot of it has to do with creating opportunities for people. We can look at poverty not necessarily as a lack of material possessions, but often a lack of opportunities. And most of my research has been done in Southeast Asia, but I've talked to many people that have started businesses and other things they've done when they've had the opportunity to do so and to help move themselves out of poverty. So having that opportunity, people starting businesses, being able to sell things on the street, tourism industry in Southeast Asia has been really helpful to people.
Well, Professor Lu, your three foreign colleagues have all shared with us their perspectives of China's poverty alleviation process, especially their personal stories. I'm sure you have many more than theirs.
Since 2001, actually, I visited a lot of places in China, around China, from north to south, from east to west. So the most impressive stories I have seen was in Henan and in Ningxia. I found a lot of people were living in the rural areas. They had no shoes to go out for every member in the families. So they, when somebody needed, they need to share the shoes. And especially in Tongxin County in Ningxia Autonomous Region, one family really struck me. People in the family were sharing the quilt. They couldn't have enough to keep them warm, and they couldn't have clean water. They couldn't have enough food to have daily in their daily life. So they had noodles, potatoes only every day. So really, the poverty, stricken areas, a lot of areas in China, I saw that. I really experienced the change, how China, fighted with the poverty. Yeah.
Tongxin County of Ningxia Province, actually, I got the chance to go there as a backpacker. And I saw a very similar situation, Professor Lu, as you described. But many would wonder what has made that change possible, from extreme poverty to now jumping certainly out of that poverty trap. How is that transformation taking place, Professor Lu?
If we talk about the change, the leadership of CPC is quite essential. With the leadership, different levels of the governments take a lot of efforts to overcome the difficulties. With the policies, with the financial inputs, and also with the human resources. So a lot of resources were inputted into those poor areas, and especially after 2012, since President Xi proposed the new concept, targeted poverty alleviation. So this helps the local governments to find those real poor families, real poor households. Yeah. And
so it seems that you have different views. Mr. Makisio is talking about infrastructure. Ms. Pearson said communication skills and communication networks. Mr. Hipscher said opportunities need to be provided. And Professor Lu said, well, maybe those are not as important as leadership and ultimate leadership. So here, we have 4 options, probably even more. Let's have a vote. Leadership. Anyone? Raise your hand. Leadership? Is that a priority?
Yeah, all of them.
Oh, how come you're saying it's all the priority? Every one of you. Let's go to the next one. Infrastructure. Anyone? Infrastructure.
Yeah.
3 of you, okay. Communications, communication network, communication
I'm
possibilities.
voting for me.
Okay. Okay, 4. And also opportunities. Opportunities. Anyone? This is a very difficult vote
We're not
because
good at
every
voting.
one of you voted for all of them. But putting jokes aside,
Yeah,
all
all
of
the
these
elements,
elements are extremely important, as we know, ladies and gentlemen. But how to make sure those things happen, that is the key, possibly. So let's start a little bit about that. How could, within a short period of time, with $2.3 at least on a daily basis for the poorest population of the country, as we know, the World Bank is $1.9 every day. China is not yet a developed economy, therefore China's standard is a little bit lower than the developed ones. But how could that happen?
The fact that we vote, all of us, the 4 different elements, is answering to the question. It's not one single factor. It's a combination of different factors. So certainly at the beginning it was the policy and the reforms that was initiated by Deng Xiaoping, but certainly investment particularly in infrastructure, which allowed productivity to enhance. I would say opportunities generated by the investments, and certainly leadership, commitment, the commitment, the long-term commitment of the leadership over 4 decades, having in mind this goal, eradicating poverty, and keeping that goal over and over, years after years. And that was not simply a political statement. This translated in allocation of resources for poverty reduction, which provided the necessary financing to operate, to implement those programs, and a clear accountability system at all levels. So it's really a combination of different factors, and there is no recipe. It's a mix.
On the other hand, it's not one size fits all, is it, Professor Lu? Because different parts of China are so different from one another.
I agree with Matteo. I think all of the elements are essential, but all of this, I think, I realized really under the leadership of CPC. That is quite a unique system in China, socialism system. I think that is an advantage.
So when you say advantage, are you saying the allocation of resources, the possibility of continuous attention, even with a change of administration? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that is part of the content. I think with the system, so we have the comprehensive design from the top government. So with the design, all of the resources from the country, financial resources, human resources, and material resources are mobilized for fighting against the poverty.
On the other hand, Professor Lu, some might ask the question, so what about the resources you put into it and the outcome? Is it proportionately? That might be the question. The other question, of course, is when you have huge resources being put into this issue, how sustainable is it likely that China is going to keep the extreme poverty out of the picture?
Yeah, I think if we want to make the output of the poverty eradication sustainable, we must keep the policies sustainable. So also this is decided already by the government to sustain the policies for another 5 years to consolidate the output of the poverty alleviation. I think that is quite important. 5 years is suitable, not too long, not too short. This will help those poor families, poor people to enhance their capacities.
Ms. Pearson, how sustainable is this approach?
I think it's sustainable provided there's multi-stakeholder dialogue at the beginning of the policy making. One thing I noticed is Xi Jinping is definitely the leader here. But I can see the KPIs are, key performance indicators filter down to on village level. Household registration takes place. I mean, 5 years ago, I remember visiting the State Poverty Alleviation Department. It doesn't exist anymore because real poverty has been crushed. And now you have the Countryside Revitalization Department. And I really like this word, revitalization, because I think it means, putting the energy back into environments which have been lackluster economically. And I've seen some phenomenal projects. And certainly that's why I find being in China so invigorating, because the experts in this area are here. The cure for malaria, short stem rice, huge contributions to global poverty alleviation originated in China. There's more ambassadors in Beijing than there are in DC and London. If you want a culmination of cosmopolitan forward thinkers on poverty alleviation led by Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping, he knows what he's talking about. He's seen the country change, he's committed, and he's going to make sure his cadres deliver.
Mr. Hipscher, of course, China could be unique in certain extent. So how helpful, inspiring, in other words, could Chinese examples and the case studies of poverty alleviation for the other countries, is it really viable for the other countries?
Yeah, I think China's experience, at least the basic principles that China has used to alleviate poverty so effectively, can certainly be used globally. Here in Southeast Asia and Africa and South Asia. Now, just like within China, the specific practices will have to be adjusted for local conditions. But some of the principles, for example, we know there's a very strong correlation between being part of global value chains and connected internationally with economic success and reductions of poverty. And that basic principle that China has used over the last 40 years of first integrating into global value chains, now moving up the value chains and being a provider of capital and technology, not just a receiver, has worked well. And other countries can follow the same pattern. Again, adapted for their local conditions, of course.
But the world has been changing, isn't it, Mr. Marchisio, with the pandemic this time particularly. So that upswing we're seeing in economies around the world almost over the past 30 years is gone, at least temporarily. So, Mr. Marchisio, tell us, frankly speaking, poverty alleviation tasks worldwide will be more challenging, isn't it?
Definitely, yes. Those that are already vulnerable suffer more and are more at risk of falling into poverty or not getting out of poverty than the rest of the population.
Professor Lu, also your take. Even though China's economy is struggling against the pandemic, so far it's one of the only economies in the world maintaining positive growth. But more difficult days still ahead. Not to mention geopolitics and supply chain disruption, things like that could happen in the future. So what is backing China in having more confidence on maintaining this level of work against the poverty, and probably even more?
I think to answer this question, we must root the difficulty in the Chinese history. Since the foundation of the new China, I think we had more difficulties than now, actually. So with the COVID-19, the government really take the most strict measures to cope with this situation. I think to keep the employment of the people, and with a sustainable policy to help those poor families to deal with their illness, their diseases. I think that is quite important. And also education policies are important for those poor areas. This will help to cut the intergenerational poverty delivery.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Matteo Marchisio, Claire Pearson, Scott Hipscher, Lu Zhixia, really appreciate it.